Morning, I'm Rabbi Erez Sherman, live from Los Angeles here at Sinai Temple. It's my pleasure to welcome you to Rabbi on the Sidelines, where we talk about the intersection of two things that often don't go hand in hand, sports and faith. I'm honored to join with us this morning, college basketball analyst, Fox Sports, NCAA March Madness 365, Big Ten Network, really all around the college basketball world, Andy Katz. Andy, thanks for being here this morning.
Well, thanks for having me, Rabbi.
Yeah, first question is, have you ever been on a rabbinic podcast before?
Actually, I have.
Oh.
I'm drawing a blank here. This is bad. In Minnesota.
Nice. Rabbi Jeremy Fine.
Yes, thank you. Sorry.
No, he's actually my colleague and good friend, the great Rabbino. Exactly. I
was with Rabbi Fine at the Final Four 2 years ago.
Nice. Well, you're on a competing network here this morning, so I'll let him know. So we're going to just jump right into your story because I'm less interested right now about St. John's beating Villanova, even though that was basically a Hanukkah miracle last night, and more interested in your story behind the scenes. Take us back to high school. You get cut from the basketball team, but the passion of the game turned into the passion of the word. What exactly happened back there a couple decades ago?
Wow, you're going way back. So that was senior year. Newton South High School was on the team, and someone had moved into our district in December. And so at the time, the max, I think, was 12. I could be blurring these facts here, but it was around 12. And you couldn't, as a senior, go down to JV. And so, but I was willing to do whatever. I just want to keep playing. And yet I was the last man out. So I was cut. And after an initial shock, because obviously my friends were on the team and worked hard for it, made the decision that I wasn't going to just sort of be a wallflower. And so I went to Newton Cable. I grew up in Newton, Mass. And at the time, they weren't broadcasting the local games. And so I made a pitch to them, and they said basically, hey, if you can do this and recruit your friends to be cameramen, we'll put it on the air. And that's what we did. And I did Newton South and Newton North that season, and broadcast the Newton South and Newton North games. I had literally friends who were the cameramen, and we put it on the air on local access cable. And that was the beginning of what is now a 30-year career.
And when you talk about broadcasting, I think actually one little similarity between the rabbinic world and the broadcasting world is the ability to tell a story. And you were quoted, I believe it was during a talk with Wisconsin journalism students. You said, "I don't think there's a straight path. I think you need to be well-versed in history and politics and critical writing to be a journalist." How did those passions come about, and what do you use today? I mean, it's not just about points on the board. You're amazing, and I followed you over these many years here of actually telling that story, right? What skills do you use there? What points do you look into when you're looking at a player, at a coach, at a team to get a bigger point across than just a basketball game?
So it's funny you bring that up, Rabbi, because a pet peeve of mine is I also would say there's performance involved in this. Mm-hmm. And I'm not a fan of when people are selected from the congregation, go up to the bima, and they cannot basically carry themselves, and they can't perform, and they have no presence. And yes, you want participation, but when they mumble and you can't hear them, or they stand and they lean over the bima and they have no presence. And so what you've done is you've completely lost the audience. Now, hopefully we're going to get that back post-pandemic, but that was a big pet peeve of mine. Anytime you went to a service, was that whoever was up there speaking better know how to speak. And and that's the same thing with a sermon, to tell a story and to deliver it. And so, yes, I think that being able to write, to deliver, to have presence, to perform are all critical skills. To how to ask a question, always open-ended, never closed, no yes, no's. It's how, why, what, when, where, not did you, and those are all parts of journalism and in real life, and you can apply it to being a rabbi, a priest, you name it, because you've got to keep people's attention. And so you got to be able to tell a story and to basically not bury the lead. You've got to grab them right at the beginning. And all that is part of your own research, your own, self-editing, which is a big thing that I think also, a little pet peeve that I think rabbis and others should do. And sort of, look, everyone's got short attention spans now. It's worse than ever. And so you really got to deliver the point as soon as possible within however you're delivering it. And so, yes, I had other interests. My professional interests were in journalism, but I was a history poli-sci major. And I'm a big believer that if you are going to cover the courts, you better know the law. If you're going to cover this pandemic, it should be medical. That's another crazy that drives me crazy is when we've got White House reporters asking questions at White House press conferences who don't understand science. It should be medical reporters who are in that briefing room who are asking the questions, because they should be trained for that. And so that's why, to me, it's always been important to be more well-rounded in this profession.
It seems like you've been to too many Zoom B'nai Mitzvah. People think we just go on the air at 9 o'clock and say Shema Yisrael, but the work starts at 7. And the same thing, sports games, you get in, the work doesn't start there. I actually was listening to, I forgot who it was on the air, but they were saying the hardest part about the pandemic when you're not standing on the court, it's not the game, it's the 2 hours before the game that you're gathering those stories, that you're hearing what they had for breakfast, that you talking about their COVID testing as well. And you did mention about the art of asking a question, and you probably already know this, but right, the Talmud actually is about asking questions. And in fact, there's something called teku, where two rabbis are arguing about something and the answer is teku, meaning there's no answer. And I love that in terms of the journalistic aspect and the sports. Has that ever gotten you, the audience often wants a yes, no answer, but can you tell us a story perhaps where you have asked a question that has led to really making a deeper impact beyond the sports court, whether it's an inspiring moment of hope or faith, or after a story has come out, something in society has changed in the sports world or out?
Wow. I don't know if I can come up with one example. Look, one of the things, and I saw you tease this, one of the things maybe I've become most famous for was, doing the bracket.
Yeah.
President Obama, and how that started was I asked the question. You don't get anything unless you ask. Nothing is handed to you. And so that was a great example where we were in a room together because I was doing a story on basketball and his family back in 2008, about 10 days before the election. And, and I've told the story many times of that Colin Powell had endorsed John McCain that morning. And so they were changing a speech. We were down in North Carolina. He was on his way to Fort Bragg, and he wanted to, we were told basically we got to stay in the room. And basically then Senator Obama and I had about 40 minutes together because they were rewriting the speech. And I just had this epiphany and popped up and said, Senator, if you win, I would like to do the bracket with you. So what are the chances that if you win, that we can come to the White House and fill out the bracket? And he thought it was, and he says, you're on, let's do it. And it's something that you're not going to get there if you don't ask. There's no question.
That's why you're here this morning. I asked.
Yes.
Oh, froze for a second. Can you hear me? 1 second. We're just frozen for a moment. Oh, you there?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. So talking about asking, you do the Obama bracket. Obviously, that was amazing in terms of combining sports and politics. I actually want to go to race in sports and faith. This week we lost a giant in John Chaney. Obviously, a couple of months ago, John Thompson. I'm a Syracuse guy, so but I've gotten to know actually Mike Sweetney from Georgetown, and gotten to love the Hoyas over this last couple of years as well. Those guys have made a difference off the court because of what they did on the court. want to read you a quote from Dan Leibovitz, SEC Associate Commissioner, who used to coach with Chaney. He said, "I'm not going to stick a lollipop in your mouth. I'm going to treat you like a man." That's what Chaney used to tell his players. What do you see the impact of John Chaney in the world of race relations, especially what's happening in the world today in terms of the George Floyd incident in June and going forward?
Well, first of all, John Chaney, I'll never forget. I was interviewing him once years ago, and I walk in and he asked me if I had, if I knew a good place to get, one of them Jewish sandwiches, because he loved corned beef, pickles, and the whole bit. Grew up, his formative years in Philadelphia, stayed there obviously most of his life, and I think his first coach was Jewish. He was really interwoven into that community, whether it was the Black community, the Jewish community in Philadelphia. Had a great appreciation for both communities and was an incredible mentor and leader and educator, and really believed in giving opportunity. You could argue, a lot of coaches like to say they follow Tikkun Olam. I'm saying that correctly?
Yeah, you got it.
But I really believe that he practiced that of trying to help others. Lived in the same row house in North Philadelphia. Never, I'm sure he made good money, but he was never someone who, absolutely just, was swimming in it like a lot of these coaches are now, and never forgot his roots. And so, what we've lost with John Thompson and John Chaney are two iconic figures who never hesitated to speak out. And were tremendous leaders, not just for the Black community, but I think for, everyone in sports. And, I would hope that we're entering a new era. I think for all, times that people, sometimes criticize LeBron James, I think he's done a marvelous job of speaking out, backing it up with like his school in Akron, and really looking out for those that have now come behind him. So it's not just words, it's actions. And, and that has to be celebrated and admired. Because we went through this lull in the 80s and 90s and really early 2000s where athletes were afraid to speak out. And now, since George Floyd, especially college athletes, are empowered to do so. No college coach right now is going to silence his player. No way. He would absolutely get crushed in that PR battle. If your player wants to speak out, they're speaking out.
And to see the names on the jerseys, not just name, but justice, equality.
Yes. And look, various entities try to hijack other narratives. For example, Colin Kaepernick was never protesting against the military. For whatever reason, the anthem at sporting events has been hijacked by the military. Okay. Whether it was whoever did it, that's what's happened. It's not about the military. It never has been. And yet no one has said anything negative about the military, yet that's what was taken from that. And then that narrative, was just sort of just ran away with it. To be honest, I don't know why we do the anthem at sporting events. Yes, it's become polarized. Some schools don't even come out. Some teams don't come out.
Right.
We don't play the anthem before service. We don't play the anthem before you walk into work. You don't play the anthem before you go to the movies. For whatever reason, it's just at sporting events. And it's become this political issue when it really shouldn't even be there in the first place.
Well, going back to politics for a second, somebody on Facebook said, is Biden going to do the NCAA bracket now that you had Obama? Are you going in there or doing it on Zoom?
I would like to. My gut is probably not this year because of the pandemic. We got lucky, actually, in all 8 years. It was under the conditions that nothing crazy is going on in the world or in the country.
Of course.
And there was one time, one of the years where we had the tsunami in Indonesia, killed maybe 100,000 people. It was, horrific. And we ended up doing a telethon kind of thing that we put up there, but we were always sort of at the mercy of global events. And we got kind of lucky, to be honest. Would we have done one with Obama this year? I don't know, because of the pandemic. So we'll see. I think there's hope. He has an interest. I've actually seen him at games. He was at one of the Final Fours I was at, actually sitting a couple rows behind me. He's a big Syracuse fan.
Yep, absolutely.
There. He'd been to Syracuse Georgetown games in DC. He's senator, and I think is the vice president. So there's definitely an interest. It works because there's an interest. Obviously, Obama had it.
For sure.
I always said, like, if you want to do a baseball bracket with Bush, great.
Nice. I think it gives some humanity to these presidents as well. They're talking about politics, but
we asked because of politics. They wanted me to ask when I was still at ESPN with Trump, but he said no, and I'm kind of glad he did, not for political reasons, because it wouldn't have worked. He wasn't into it, not into the sport, and I would have said the same thing had Hillary won. Now, Bill Clinton, big basketball fan, I've actually sat in this tournament. Went to I know he was at the Final Four when Arkansas was there in '94.
Absolutely.
But I don't think it would have worked with Hillary.
Right. Want to go actually the Jewish route. One thing, actually, the next 3 weeks I have the law firm of Katz, Greenberg, and Sherman on the show. But
all friends of mine.
Yeah, no, they're wonderful. And what I love about this program, like I said, we're not talking sports. We're talking about the stories behind these sports, how to ask these questions. You mentioned actually in an interview with the Forward, the Jewish newspaper, that you were going to take your daughter to Israel for her bat mitzvah. Did that happen?
Did I say my daughter? Because we took my son.
Oh, your son. Sorry, one of your. It was a couple years ago. For one of your children.
Yes.
So did that have an impact on you? Basketball's become big in Israel with Maccabi, now with the Wizards. I just read yesterday the Wizards started a Hebrew Instagram page to get the NBA popular in Israel. Was there an impact in there that trip had that you could tell us about?
Well, I mean, it certainly had an impact on me personally. I loved it, and I knew I would. But we had an unbelievable trip. So we were there the summer of 18, and we went sort of a foodie trip. Unbelievable food. Went to some non-traditional places. Actually, we went on a Jeep tour on the Syrian border. That was pretty crazy. And with someone who was formerly in the Mossad.
That wasn't John Chaney, was it?
No. To eating in the Arab section of Jerusalem, best pitas I've ever had in my life, and hummus. It was an unbelievable trip. Would go back in a second. Basketball is huge there. I hope the NBA can continue to penetrate because there's no question that there's an opportunity for more players, I think, to come through this pipeline, and it'd be great, if there was a little bit more through college. And I mean, obviously, UConn had a little bit of a pipeline.
Yeah, I'm getting their own Sheffers on the way here. Exactly.
Yeah. So it'd be great if it could continue. Obviously, basketball with Maccabi Tel Aviv and and their ability to be major factors in the EuroLeague. Has always been a big factor. It's funny, through the EuroLeague, it's a plus. When it comes to the Olympics, it's a negative because, and the World Cup, you could argue, because they get grouped with Europe because in the past, they couldn't actually play in their region. If they played in their region, I think there'd be a great chance that Israel would be represented, potentially in the Olympics in basketball or in the World Cup in soccer. But playing in Europe, you have no chance. But
it's actually interesting because the baseball, they're ready for Tokyo 2021. Actually, we hosted the Olympic team here last year with a couple other players who also fascinating in terms of the Judaism, the Israel roots as well. Actually, we were supposed to go to Israel this summer as a synagogue trip, and we were going to look at Israel through the angle of sports. We were going to go different partnerships that are happening, special needs, Arab-Israeli, that obviously got canceled. But next year, if you guys want to hop along, that would be you can be our guest. One last question, because I know obviously you have a busy college basketball day as well. Last week I talked to Chelsea Hopkins. She played for Duke and San Diego State. Now Benot Ashdod, Israeli MVP. She mentioned in college basketball this idea of faith and Athletes in Action. I never heard of that before last week. And all these players studying Bible together, scriptures. I'm not hearing that come through, obviously, in any telecast. It sort of seems like this sort of secret that faith is getting these college athletes through some both difficult and really exciting times. Do you see any moments in college basketball where you see moments of faith?
Yes. And, look, it's interesting. I mean, Baylor, number 2 team in the country, potential title team. I've interviewed Jared Butler, who is very out with his faith. And you will hear that at times in post-game interviews. And look, to each his own or her own, as long as you don't completely hijack the interview with that, that's fine. We see that all the time, in a post-game interview. I think the fine line comes with the coaches. And I think it also depends at what institution you're at. And I would say this regardless. So, for example, if you are at a Jesuit, institution, Catholic institution, a lot of times, like Villanova, has a priest on the bench.
At the end of the bench. I know. I'm waiting for my call for yeshiva.
Right. So, look, that going in. All right. If you're a player, you are playing at that school. So you can't complain about that if you are not of that faith. The problem you run into, and I've seen this, is if you are at a state institution, okay, and you bring in someone of faith, regardless of the faith. And if you do that, then you need to make sure that that is optional, not mandatory. Look, I have no problem if you want to bring faith into that locker room, but you better be certain that everyone is okay with it. Because I have been in locker rooms where there have been ministers, priests, have not seen a rabbi, but, and if that's the case, that's fine. But I said, make sure that it is, someone who either A, is non-denominational and can speak in general terms of giving a blessing, which of course is more than fine. A benediction, if you will, universally. But, I think you really have to watch that line if it is strictly Christian based, if you're at a state institution, or, you may have players on your team who are Muslim, who, maybe Hindu, Buddhist, regardless. And so I really think, and also it's that fight, because you don't want to be, as a coach, interviewing, what do you believe? But you really need to take the temperature of your group, in that sense. But I do think you have that right, maybe is the wrong word, but if you are at an institution that is faith-based, Liberty, and all the Catholic schools, then, look, if you're a player and you go there, that's the deal. So that's going in.
Right. Now in a couple of weeks, I have Tamir Goodman, Jewish Jordan, who obviously is going to go to Maryland, Towson State, and we've connected over the years and brought up those issues as well. Last question: your pick for the championship? Who's going to win it? And do they need a Hanukkah miracle to get there? And any dark horse coming up there? And he's been lots of times. I just read John Feinstein's book, On the Road to March, and talking about these little schools, the UMBCs, and how that impacts. What school don't we know about that we're going to read about in March?
Well, I don't think there's one you don't know about. Drake is having a great year. They certainly could make a mini run, but I think it's going to be Gonzaga or Baylor. They're the two best teams in the country. It'd be unbelievable if they were both undefeated and meeting for the national championship. We've never, ever, ever had that. So that would be amazing if that were to occur. So we'll see. I mean, I would say, Illinois or Iowa, I still have faith that they can get there. But I would certainly lean toward Gonzaga or Baylor.
Nice. Well, everybody hear that? Andy Katz, Gonzaga, and Baylor. We want to thank Andy Katz. A big shout out to Rabbi Andy Feig of Sinai Akiba Academy for connecting me to Andy Katz. A shout out to Sinai Temple, really to you for allowing us to ask those questions that we don't hear on TV. Next week, we're on with ESPN's Dan Schulman. Amazing stories, also of faith.
Canadian Jew who played and actually broke his foot, but played in the Maccabi games, the adult version for Canada in Israel. Unfortunately, broke his foot there.
Exactly. So again, these stories of intersection of sports and faith. Andy, we look forward, if you're out here for the Pac-12, for a visit here to Sinai Temple. We'll make sure that all those on the BEMA will be speaking correctly and doing their research, and we're looking forward to seeing everybody then. This has been Rabbi on the Sidelines. Again, a thank you to Andy Katz, and have a wonderful week. Thank you, everybody.